We're going to move on to then the next section, which is going to be a discussion between a couple of panel members, and then we would move on to the questions that have been put forward for the presenters after then a conclusion. So I think it's sort of wrapping up of the day. So thank you very much, and if you can stick with us, I know it's a difficult time of the day. A small gift for the presenters? No. If I can just ask the panel members to come and join me up front here, I'd appreciate it, please. Thank you. Good. If I use this microphone, is that audible? Everybody can hear? All good. Thank you. Yeah, so basically, what we'd like to do in this session is we've got panelists here from various parts of the supply chain. And I think besides a bit of assisting in wrapping up today's way forward and conclusion, also perhaps just some ideas of what we can do to take the industry forward. So Peter, perhaps if I can start from your side, is there anything from today? We spoke a bit about high oil from a oilseed crush or production point of view and whatever. How do you see anything that came from today that we can probably concentrate on, take forward?
Mr. Chairman, can everybody hear me all right? Yep. I think what I got from today was that the overseas countries growing sunflower seed, namely Russia, Ukraine, Argentina, Europe, Bulgaria, France, are all growing a far higher quality than we are. That's not to say that South Africa cannot do it. And going back 20 years, we certainly grew an average crop here of 42.5% oil content, when we produced 1 million tons of sunflower, the biggest crop of all time in this country. So it's possible. I think what's happened is, and it's nobody's real fault, that we've then concentrated on yields per hectare rather than quality. And all the charts that we've seen earlier have shown quality of sunflower has dropped dramatically over the last 8 to 10 years in this country. What does that do? That makes oil more expensive. It makes the crushing operation more expensive. And eventually oils and fats in the country, to everybody who buys them and uses them, become a lot more expensive. Then alternatives like Bulgarian, Romanian, Russian, Ukrainian vegetable oil, sunflower oil can be imported in bulk in here, missing out the need for sunflower, missing out the crushing industry to the point where it becomes even more expensive. So I think, Mr. Chairman, the lesson is, let's get back producing a crop, a primary crop. It was very evident early on. Planting sunflower at the right time, the right hybrid, cultivar, looked after properly, grown properly, can produce some amazing results, both on yield and oil quality. And as an industry, and I'm an industry leader in our field on this, our industry, the crushing industry, is prepared to pay the farmer a handsome premium for giving us the right product that ultimately will help the rest of the country with its cost base.
Thanks, Peter. I think that makes a lot of sense, and obviously that incentive that producers need to produce a high oil content and sell it, starting to take traction at the moment, and I think it's very important that a lot of work goes into it to try and facilitate a friendly environment for incentives for high oil content. I think there's a lot of progress and innovation in that direction at the moment, as you pointed out. So I think we certainly can take that as one of our major take-home messages. Ferdy, if I can put you on the spot and say, is planting sunflower economically viable at the moment, and in the longer term, what do we need to do to keep it economically viable?
Yeah, thanks very much, Erard. So I think, I tried to show in my presentation around the margins. So, at farm gate, and what we've done is taking not the last 2 years. So the last 2 years, we had this blowout of vegetable oil prices. They are coming down, but in normal years, I would still argue that sunflower with decent yields are certainly a good value proposition for farmers, especially in the areas, if we look at Northwest, Limpopo, and the western parts of Free State. The wetter areas, where you have significantly higher potential for soybeans and maize, and where your sclerotinia, I was also looking at the sclerotinia impacts in the more high moisture, high rainfall areas. That's probably in the areas where sunflower will struggle against and continue to struggle against maize and soybeans. But we have vast tracts of land where sunflower is a very competitive crop to grow. It's resilient. Now I understand, at least from a farmer perspective, or at least if I put my farmer's hat on, why the root system. So thanks for those great presentations. I understand now why a sunflower crop, Andre explained to us the root system and why it's more resilient, and how much more resilient it is than any other crop, and its ability to withdraw water. So it's not only about the final margins, it's about the whole package that we have within sunflower. So I think, Erard, there's no doubt in my mind, we always talk about the small, Kobus, you talked about the small differences. So it's these small steps. You need to focus on that 200, 300 kilograms per hectare extra. So your 1.4 and 1.5 is not going to cut it. You need to get to 1.7, 1.8, 1.9 tons per hectare, and suddenly this crop becomes a very competitive crop. And Peter, if we can do it at the right quality, plant it at the right time, even if you get a little premium on it, I think sunflower at those type of yields, if we can add 300 kilos, and we certainly have the cultivar, we have the technology, we just need to get the practices in shape, I think we can do it. Thanks.
Thanks, Ferdy. I think that makes a lot of sense. Corné, can I ask you from a production point of view? We've come across a whole lot of suggestions today in terms of improvement in agronomic practices, planting dates, from a fertilizer point of view, a number of aspects that could possibly benefit production. How do we get the message out to the producer on what came out of today's suggestions and way forward, and from a research point of view, and any other suggestions that you can take away from today?
Thank you, Erard, and thank you for the opportunity. I think for us, we've started to hear what Peter is saying about 2 to 3 years ago. It's all about a different way of looking at sunflower as a crop. We all know that most of our farmers used to plant sunflower as a catch crop and not as a proper cash crop. And there's a different way of viewing those types of crops. If it's a proper rotational crop that's part of your business as a proper rotational and cash crop, you will do things differently. You'll make sure you plant the crop in the right planting window, in the optimal planting window. You will make sure your fertility is on par. So I think that different way of looking at sunflower as a rotational crop, Peter, is what we have been punting the past 2 years, and I think it's been doing well. We have seen progress. There's still a long way to go, because I think always as a an emergency crop, sunflower will always be there as a catch crop. And then you have something that's viable. But the way that you look and approach sunflower, if it's different, as all the speakers said today, if you handle sunflower the same way you handle maize, you're going to get the returns. So I think just as a start, Erhard, the way we look at sunflower will change, I think, all these things we spoke about today.
Thanks very much. It makes a lot of sense. Ferdy, if I can just ask you, fertilizer came across very strongly today as being one of the major cost components of sunflower production. Is there how should we go about, and what should we do about those high costs? Obviously, it's not an easy answer, but perhaps you have some ideas.
Yeah. So, and I think here, Corné, you must also come in here on the fertilizer side. So we had a fertilizer conference last week, also here. It was a symposium, and yeah. So the reality, South Africa, we don't produce enough nitrogen. We have to import nitrogen. I think it's about 50% or 40% that we produce locally. We don't have any potash, and we should have sufficient phosphate, but there's a problem with phosphor and the whole production line. So some components of our fertilizer we can certainly sort out and have more competitive, be delivered to our farmers. The reality, however, is we have to import a lot of the products, and Andre, in terms of the kind of fertilization of sunflower, I think I'm not the specialist, Erhard, but just looking at what we saw today, it feels to me like there's a gap for some more work to be done in fertilizer on sunflower. That was kind of my take on it. We have been farming sunflower fertilizer. We've been farming sunflower for like 30 years now, and we have those heavy loam soils, typical Northwest, and it's always for us like a fine balance. How hard can you push these soils, because these are heavy soils, and there's a limiting factor of too much magnesium, so you kind of have to sort that out. Otherwise, any fertilizer, as you go to kind of throw water into the ocean. So it's a supply chain. They're part of the supply chain stuff that I think Corné must maybe also add to. And then there's a research component, I think, that we could maybe also consider talking more about, but I'm not the specialist in that.
Maybe, Erhard, just to add to Ferdi, I think it was his second or third slide where he showed our competitiveness in nitrogen compared to the rest of the world. So we are already a very expensive nitrogen source in South Africa that we have. It's also, like Andre showed, a very large part of our production cost of sunflower. So it all adds up to our competitiveness. And the golden thread I've heard today from most of the speakers before lunch was nitrogen. And where is our optimal nitrogen application rate? And if we can get those rates with the help of our researchers in the country, I think already with that gains, it's going to help our competitiveness of sunflower in South Africa.
Thanks very much. I was tongue-in-cheek. I want to say if we discovered some natural gas of South Africa, that could go a long way. But we have. We just have to utilize it. It should happen. Thanks very much for that, Peter. If I can just ask you from a processing point of view, we always get the comments made that we're producing enough sunflower in South Africa just to satisfy the market. I get the feeling that we're not producing enough sunflower for market demands. Maybe you can clear that up for us. I think it's an important one. And then secondly, all the challenges that you're facing from a production point of view in the country obviously must also be quite challenging.
Yeah, as far as the crop production goes, we probably going to produce a crop of around about 800,000 tonnes. I think the CEC figure's coming out tomorrow, but give or take 800,000. We've got a crushing capacity in South Africa of a good 1 million tonnes plus on sunflower, with some plants that can do beans and sunflowers, could actually switch to sunflower and even increase that capacity. So we're nowhere near growing enough local seed to supply the capacity that we've got, and also the need for oil. If we crush 800,000 tonnes of seed, we will still import plus minus 250,000 tonnes of sunflower oil over and above that. So that shows you the overall demand for sunflower in this country and the need to have it grown locally. So there's huge potential for sunflower, given that we can, the right pricing structures, getting the farmers to produce the right crops in the right areas with the right hybrids. It's an old story, but it's very simple. But it's needed by the industry. The resulting oil cake from that crush is all taken up locally. So it's a great story domestically for the country. As far, not such a good story is the load shedding, which is affecting our industry like every other. So we're no different to anybody else. But it does add to inefficiencies in our plants when we have to stop-start. It can be a real nightmare on quality, on yields, on overall production, and adding to your overall cost structure of a plant. But even with that, if we can produce big crops in this country, we can utilize them, and we can make the overall cost structure of oils and fats that much better for the general public. Really, it's a very simple story.
Corné, if I can, sorry, I think I did sort of ask, but I'm putting you on the spot here. What communication do you recommend, or what can we assist with in communication to producers to get all the message across regarding a lot of the initiatives that might come from you?
Yeah, Errol, that's a very good question. I mean, as Grain SA, we are a producer organization, so we try to communicate as efficiently and as best as possible. But it's actually very difficult to get the message across. I wish every single member of mine could have sat here today in this room to hear what's going on in the sunflower industry in terms of research and production. But it's not always possible. So what we have created is some ways to communicate to our farmers in terms of articles we write in the different magazines, whether it's the SA Grain magazine or the Oilseed Focus, our newsletters. We've set up WhatsApp groups and Telegram groups to communicate this. One of the most effective still, I think, is farmer days and research farmer days, where a farmer can come and see within his area what has been done through research, or whether it's hybrids, new hybrids, whether it's fertilization. That seems to work. But I mean, from where we are now until we get it on that scale on different farms to show farmers, it takes time. So we have to start with the process through writing articles already, what have been discovered by researchers. So the problem we have, Errol, is people don't read, or they are selective readers. And if we don't draw them into to read and to be curious about it, we're not going to get that message across. So I didn't answer your question, but I think the answer, it's difficult, but it needs to be a continuous process of communicating.
I just quickly wanted to add something, Corneille, Farmers' Days. I was just thinking about the soya story, how many Farmers' Days there were initially to spread the message. And it sounds like a very traditional way. I don't know whether, if there's any other view on it, but maybe just, again, there are some very strong sunflower champions out there, guys that are growing super sunflower, for many, many years. So I don't know, maybe that's just a very simple way, and I don't know if it's that effective, but sometimes that's where farmers, they don't read that much, but that's maybe where the transfer of knowledge can be.
I think the time has caught up with us a little bit. Any last word from any of the panel that you'd like, or everybody comfortable?
One last thing, and I think this is, Erod, where you and Peter are also very knowledgeable, is in the total supply chain. So we're talking about the crushers, we're talking about the farmers. But in the middle, we also have the silo operators and the storage in the value chain. And that's where we also need to do work in that space, because the grading, receiving the sunflower, doing the grading, etc., is also an important component in the cell supply chain. So, the initiative, Peter, that you're referring to is great. I think that's just going to lead. It's going to lead the way, and there will be an evolution, but I think also an important partner in the cell supply chain.
Corneille, any last word from your side?
Just maybe a last word from my side. I think there's maybe lots of stumbling blocks for sunflower going forward, but there's also more positives. I think as a crop rotation crop, getting our stability in the whole grain and oilseed basket is very important, and in that basket, sunflower plays a very important role. We are a net importer of oil and protein still, in a way, so we need to grow, and that's positive. We have the demand, and that's not often you get it in South Africa, where you have this massive demand, the demand pool. We hear about lots of other countries that struggle with markets, but we don't have this problem with sunflower, so the market is there. I think we all talk about Sclerotinia and the concerns we have, but there's work being done that's already showing effect. There's people doing work on seed treatment that can be a solution. We're going out of a wet cycle, possibly in a drier cycle. Again, that's a big win maybe for sunflower going forward. Thanks.
Yeah, just one point from my last point is that the early signs on my growing contract for high oil content this season coming up that we've had about 2,000 tonnes already delivered to the factory in Boxburg are unique. We needn't worry about Russia and Ukraine and Argentina. Some of the early stuff I'm seeing is 47, 48, 49. We've already had one at 50% oil content. That is South African seed, ladies and gentlemen. So it can be done. And those farmers are going to receive a very handsome bonus for producing that stuff. So I'll leave you with that.
Thanks, Peter. I think that the initiative of high oil is certainly one of the ones that we need to focus on. I'm going to sacrifice a bit of my conclusion time, which I'm sure you'll be very happy about, for a question and answer session. And I believe it's not a very long one, but Gerrit Kuhn is going to be at the podium to handle that first.
Chairperson, thank you very much. Yes, we received a lot of questions, a lot of valid questions, and all these questions are important to us, but unfortunately we won't be able to answer and to address all these questions this afternoon. So forgive me, but I picked a few questions and the rest will refer to the experts, or we will answer it from the information available at the Oilseeds office. because we've got the email addresses and all the telephone numbers of every person present here. There were very specific questions that we will answer from the office side regarding regulations, cultivar, specific cultivar questions, production areas, bird damage, diseases, mentorship to farmers, and support to farmers. I wish to start off with the questions and just confirm with Corné, your question about the export parity price, was that properly addressed by the two gentlemen on your left-hand side, or you still need an explanation on why the sunflower price is on export parity while we're not producing enough for local consumption at the moment?
Gerard, thank you for asking that question while I'm sitting here. Now, the question is a principal one, and I often get that from our farmers. Why is it that we are in a shortage for sunflower while our prices are on export parity? I know it can be a loaded question, but and relative to other years, prices are high, but it's also relative. Why aren't our prices moving closer to import parity when we are at a shortage in the local industry?
It's a good question. I don't believe they're anywhere near export parity, to be quite clear. If we've got soybeans right now are having to trade at export parity because we possibly got to export and we've got a surplus. Sunflower isn't. If anything, I think I've had 3 inquiries over the last month about imports. So we're nowhere near export parity for sunflower.
If I can just add a comment, I would imagine even if we were at export parity, the logistics of exporting sunseeds out of this country would be problematic.
Plus the fact that it takes 3rd place behind maize and soybeans. So there's no way sunflower is going to be exported out of this country. Well,
we've had it once. There was an export, there was like, what was that, Peter? That was the 1.1 million tons. Did you export those, Peter? Okay, great. So I think it's the calculation, the way that we do the calculation. We can maybe check that. The derived price, obviously, the price trades on oil and meal. It's a derived price of what you get in your products. So that's a big in the whole complex. So I think that's a big one. But let's all sit around a table and do the calculations. I think it will be a good one.
Thank you, Chairperson. Then part of that topic is also, and I can ask Ferdi and Peter and Corné to give their view, is there a specific reason or reasons for the decrease in the sunflower production this current season? Corné?
I think the past season or the season that's currently on the land is because mostly of Sclerotinia. In a farmer's mind and his decision making, he always remembers the previous season that he's planted, and he's trying to learn from that. And especially in the western areas of the country, farmers were hard hit with Sclerotinia, and that was probably mostly their decision. Also other competition crops like soybeans taking space, and because we are in a wet cycle, farmers decided to plant soybeans rather than sunflower. I think the third one is there wasn't enough sunflower seed available.
Thank you, Ferdi.
Yeah, I can just quickly add. So the shift that we saw, about 30,000 hectares of the reduction was mainly, that was in the heart of the northwest area where we normally see the sunflowers, but that's where we saw great yields in soybeans. So the guys did the calculation. Soybeans, you don't require the nitrogen. You need your P and your K. So it did have a cost impact. You have farm safe seed from your neighbor who just had the previous season a good 3-4 tons, and you do the calculation. At the time of planting, soybean prices were at about 8,900, touching 9,000 Rand a ton. Sunflower was touching around 10,000 Rand a ton. And then you were doing the calculation. If you could get your 3 tons on soybeans, which were kind of common in the previous season, that you kind of heard all these rumors, farmers were doing really well. 3 tons at 9,000, 2 tons, 1.5, with a little bit of risk maybe of sclerotinia at 10,000, and then you kind of, the sum is done. So I think that was a little bit of a shift that we saw. I think for the next season, it will recover to the hectares that we've seen before, especially if it's a drier year.
Thank you. Chairperson, the next question I wish to pose to Dr. Henny Groenewald. And it was given to understand part of our decision of our stance on GM and gene editing was based on our ability to export to Europe. Will Europe's change in regulation of gene editing help us motivate for changes in our regulations?
The first point is the European Union has not made a decision yet. They're reviewing it. At the moment, they're regulating genome editing based on a court pronouncement. The UK has decided, and they just published their regulations where they exclude that. The acceptance is a complicated story. It depends on, let's start at the easy side. Definitely, European Union is not a great importer of GM, especially if it's human food. It complicates matters. So I think if it's new products, you should consider, obviously, the first place, your export market. There's publications that showed, for example, the decision in some of the African countries that based their decision on that. If they go and look at it, the export was actually overestimated. So all those, the point I want to make is if you do a sustainability assessment, you look at all of these different issues. If the EU is an export market, it's definitely one of the red flags. They have not made a final decision on genome editing, SDN 1 and 2 as yet.
Chairperson, you will stop me. There's a few more. One to Dr. Nikki Crew. Is the heat stress with added stigma receptivity also applicable when heat waves are experienced during pollination?
Hi, thanks for the question. So, no, so we saw 2 different factors. The stigma receptivity was increased when the plants were heat stressed as juveniles before they flowered. So they adapted their growth patterns so that they could compensate for the heat stress. When you look at heat stress on the flower itself, we saw there was some decrease in the receptivity when we artificially heated the plants. But we got confounding facts when we looked at the heat wave data. It looked like the plants might have had elevated stigma receptivity, but that's cautionary because plants can increase the way the test works is based on peroxidases. And when plants are heat stressed, they increase their peroxidases anyway. So it could have just been an indicator of the heat stress. So I would say probably they don't increase their receptivity when they're being heat stressed on the flower itself.
Thank you. Then a question to Dr. Sophia Mahali. Doctor, you referred to rainfall distribution and its effect on sunflower yield. How much would soil type impact on this result?
Soil type?
Soil type.
Yeah, if you know the rainfall and the soil type, it's also connected, but we don't have any research regarding that. Yeah, it's really connected and can have an effect on the plant if it's sandy soil or if the soil have high clay content. So it's definitely it will affect on the yield, but we don't have result to show how much is effect on the yield.
Thank you. Then another question is: do we have a comprehensive soil profile map for South Africa?
I'm not sure of that. I'm not a soil scientist, so maybe somebody else in the room, he can answer this question.
Good, Chairperson. I will keep this one and we'll address it in the appropriate way then.
Yes, there's a comprehensive soil map for South Africa. I'll send it to the office.
Okay.
I've
and
seen
then
it.
we can circulate it.
There's good mapping on South Africa.
Chairperson, then a question to Mr. Kobus van Zyl. Is there an optical sunflower growth stage or environment for foliar applications?
Yes, what we've been seeing, most of the farmers apply the foliar nutrients when they're still able to get over the crop, and the big sprayers, the high boys, made it possible to do it a bit later. So we get good results by applying early. Depends on what kind of shortage you have. So for instance, we saw extremely good results on boron early, and then at the later stage as well, if there's a deficiency. If there's not a deficiency, you don't always get the results that you want. So like I said, it's based on what is the deficiency, and if you look at that specific deficiency and you, as jy dit aanspreek, if you, what's aanspreek in Engels?
Address.
If you look at that and you sort out that specific deficiency, then you'll get good results. And the timing is, if I would do it, I would say by getting over the crops with a normal sprayer, normal tractor sprayer, that's a good stage to do a foliar spray, if you've got specific deficiencies.
Thank you. Chairperson, then a question to Dr. Belinda Jansen van Rensburg. If Alternaria is seed-borne, why does leaf infection start so late in the season?
It all depends on the environmental conditions and the maximum temperature and humidity conditions. So it can be dormant or in the environment, and as soon as the environment is conducive, then you can get that late infestations of the leaves.
Thank you. Chairperson, the last one is to Mrs. Veana Lowe, and that's regarding the implementation of artificial intelligence and near-infrared imaging for grain grading. Can you perhaps give us more information on the matter, please?
Thank you, Gerard. There's still a long way to go. There's already a lot of international companies where the technology, and we know that the technology do exist. The challenge, I think, for all of us is to find a way to make it affordable for us to use in South Africa, according to our defects that we find in our grains and oilseeds. So I think the technology do exist. It's still just around the affordability and then the building of the calibrations to be applied in South Africa.
Thank you very much. Chairperson, thank you very much. As mentioned, we will answer the rest of the questions via email and messages.
Thanks very much, Gerrit, for handling that. Well done. I think thanks for all the very valid questions, and again, apologies we couldn't get through all of them. I think I'm not going to have a long conclusion. I think it was a very constructive day. I think there have been a lot of take-home messages and a lot of work to go and be done. I trust that it was as informative for all of you as it was for me. So I really appreciate you taking your time and being with us here today. Fortunately, we're not entirely finished. In case you are thirsty and you would like to have a cocktail or a drink, a networking drink, that opportunity is available. Gerrit, where do we go? The same venue as what we had lunch. That's on the deck. So for those of you who are interested and would like to still have a chat. Thanks very much and travel home safely.
You will get sunflowers I will buy from you. You will help me with those. He's a trader of those. Okay. So I will talk to him, but I will come